So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've got over 24 clips on several different topics for what I think should be a great show tonight. As always, this is my weekly broadcast of the best clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the corporate media here in the United States, along with a little political comedy and along with my commentary between the clips. And then after I show my couple dozen clips, hopefully I'll be able to get a little live discussion going based on on-topic comments that my viewers who are watching this as a live event leave in the comment section. Also, as always, I'll be using clips from the Sunday morning news shows on the regular Big Five outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, plus some quasi-news clips from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher broadcast last Friday. I'll be talking about the capture of Mexican drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. I'll be talking about the death penalty, Syria, marijuana, and some other topics, but I wanted to start the broadcast with the biggest breaking story, which is what's going on in the Ukraine, where the President Viktor Yanukovych has fled the capital, and events are pretty fast-moving, but as Bill Maher pointed out on HBO's Real Time last Friday, there's one constant in the story you can depend on that Bill explained over in this clip.
But it is still a very volatile situation there in Ukraine. President Obama hasn't really decided exactly what we're going to do, but Fox News has already decided that whatever it is, it's wrong. Sean Hannity said today it's either gutless and will show the world that we're weak, or it's reckless and it's getting us all killed. I'll get back to you on Monday.
So, I'm not a regular watcher of Hannity's show, so I don't know how accurate Bill Maher was on that point, but I did notice that supposedly straight news anchor Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday this morning, within the first minute of the show, was already framing the Ukraine situation as calling into question President Obama's judgment, as you can see in that clip over here.
We'll discuss Ukraine's future and whether it will ultimately side with the West or Russia, with two leading senators. Dick Durbin, the number 2 Democrat in the Senate, and Republican Kelly Ayotte, a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. And we'll ask our Sunday panel whether President Obama has badly misjudged Vladimir Putin.
So yeah, I guess over on Fox News, the real issue in the Ukraine is whether President Obama misjudged the situation or badly misjudged the situation. So that looked like that was going to be a fair and balanced debate. And I noticed to get the most effective partisan spin for 2016, Chris Wallace even folded in a little bashing of Hillary Clinton in the softball question he teed up for Republican Senator Kelly Ayotte over in this clip.
President Obama famously came into office saying that he intended to repair relations between the United States and Russia, which brought us to that famous moment involving then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and the Russian foreign minister. Take a look.
I wanted to present you with a little gift which represents what President Obama and Vice President Biden and I have been saying. And that is, we want to reset our relationship. And
let's do it together.
So we will do it together.
But it turned out that instead of reset, in Russian, that button said overcharge, and that's where the problems began. Senator Ayotte, has President Obama's reset effort with Russia failed, and has it contributed to the problems that we have in Ukraine, in Syria, in Iran?
Yes, it has, Chris, and I think that's why this is an opportunity for the president to really be unequivocal with Putin right now in the Ukraine. What happens in Ukraine very much matters. They need to determine their future, not Russia. We have seen, obviously, behavior from Putin, from harboring Snowden to the efforts to interfere in Syria and also with arming the Assad regime. In addition to that, thinking about the reports of their violations of the INF Treaty, their reset policy has failed. It is time to reset the reset, and I think Ukraine presents an opportunity for the president to do that with clear American leadership here for a good outcome.
So you can see there is some sort of Republican talking point there that Kelly Ayotte is going along with that there is definitely some opportunistic bashing of the Obama administration, I think, from Fox News and a little bit from Kelly Ayotte there. You know, I noticed I called Kelly Ayotte a moderate Republican in a previous show, and I got a comment earlier today from someone watching one of those previous shows saying she wasn't that moderate, and I did a little research, and I think she may not be as moderate as moderate enough for me to be calling her moderate, even though I've heard a lot of other pundits call her that. But I think it's because she's one of the only couple Republican senators from New England, and I kind of group her in with like Susan Collins, who is more moderate, and I don't know, I guess her voting record isn't quite that moderate, but I don't want to spend, I don't know, does this picture look like extra red or something? I wonder if hold on one second, let me do something here real quick, see if that, did that solve the problem? I don't know, I heard if you hold white up to the camera, sorry about that, but I want to show you a more serious article, sort of analysis of why what's going on in the Ukraine is so important in this, what's going to happen in Europe in the long devolution of the Soviet Union. I saw this good article in the Guardian that sort of backed up something I heard someone talking about on NPR this week. Here's the article, and I put a link down to this article in the video description so you can read it. A brief primer on Vladimir Putin's Eurasian dream, and it's about how Vladimir Putin is setting up this rival to the European Union. It's called the Eurasian Customs Union. And here, let me see. I'm going to zoom in on that map graphic there on the bottom there. And you can see that big green blob in the middle. That's the Ukraine that could be a prospective member of either union. So it's there's the Ukraine there, and then there's is it Georgia, I think, down there underneath Russia, and as like the couple prospective members there. And I heard this NPR analysis of the Eurasian Customs Union as based on as the antithesis of like liberal democracies. In fact, they were talking about how they're taking the best of communism and the best of fascism in all these. That's like for authoritarian regimes in all of these places. And I don't know, the best of communism and the best of fascism, to me that seems like taking the best of AIDS and the best of Ebola or something. I don't know, but I thought that was a really interesting map from the Guardian article, and it shows why the Ukraine is right in the middle of a big basically a big fight as to which way that part of Europe is going to go, whether it's going to go towards the European Union or towards this weird Eurasian Customs Union that Vladimir Putin is trying to fashion. And as to what the breaking news was in the Ukraine, in just the last 24 hours, there's been a lot of changes. I mentioned that the president, Viktor Yanukovych, was gone, and then they also released this former prime minister who had been a political prisoner for a couple of years. I want to show, this is Hamish McDonald, the reporter for ABC News on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, talking about how Yulia, let me see, make sure I get her name right. I've been practicing it, so I get it right. Yeah, Yulia Tymoshenko, who is a rival of Viktor Yanukovych, was released from prison, and she may be taking over the presidency in these elections in May. But here's the clip.
Its own authority, appointing an acting president, the Speaker of the Parliament, as well as that, releasing the arch-rival of Yanukovych, Yulia Tymoshenko, the former Prime Minister. She's been in prison. She has back problems now and is in a wheelchair. As a power vacuum opens up, the sworn rival, Yulia Tymoshenko, enters centre stage. She began the day a prisoner and ended a key player in this country's future. Tymoshenko is not universally admired here, but they shout approval when she vows justice for the ousted president. A swift session.
Now, one kind of useful piece of information that was over on Fox News Sunday regarding Yulia Tymoshenko's release. They had Democratic Senator Dick Durbin on, and he's talked about how he'd been working for her release for a couple years, and he actually spoke to her after her release and I didn't want to make it seem like nothing of any informational value came across on Fox News Sunday at all on the Ukraine situation, so I'll play you that clip here.
Well, Chris, it was quite a relief yesterday. Yulia Tymoshenko has been in prison for 2.5 years, and I've been working for almost 2 years for her release, and she was finally released by a unanimous vote in their parliament. I spoke to her just after she had addressed the crowd in Maidan Square. She sounded tired and looked frail on the reports that we'd seen, but she assured me that she's looking for a peaceful resolution to the problems in Ukraine, to follow the Constitution and the law. This whole charge of a coup by Yanukovych, let me tell you, it makes no sense. The coup, if any, was by the parliament that enacted the laws that made it clear that they want to change in Ukraine.
So that was kind of optimistic, and I don't know what's going to happen next in the Ukraine. I showed clips from Bill Maher, a clip from Bill Maher at the beginning, and he was talking about on Friday's show how they had just worked out this deal for a unity government. So things have been changing so fast, but it seems, at least at this moment, that the forces of the European Union, the people who want that, have won, at least in the capital. There are people on the eastern side who have more allegiance to Russia. But I want to show you, Senator John McCain was over on Face the Nation, and he talked about how we have to stand up to Putin, but he didn't really have that much negative to say about what Barack Obama had done. And if there was anything negative to say, he would have said it. I'll show you in a later clip on a different subject. But first, here's John McCain on what's happening in the Ukraine from CBS's Face the Nation in this clip.
But their economic situation is so dire that literally the economy is on the verge of collapse, and they're going to need help immediately. The second issue I think that is not clear is, what does Vladimir Putin do? The eastern part of Ukraine is, especially with older people, more pro-Russian. Crimea is very Russian. Putin's major naval installation, Sevastopol, is there. And so what does Putin do here? I think the message has to be sent to him to let the Ukrainian people determine their own future. And a partition of Ukraine is totally unacceptable, and we need to act immediately to give them the economic assistance that they need, based on reforms that are going to be required as well. It's going to be tough sledding.
So yeah, it didn't sound much like John McCain was suggesting anything that the Obama administration isn't already doing. And I'll show later on some other issues that John McCain is quick to criticize the Obama administration's foreign policy. But before I get to that, I want to show you one more clip on the Ukraine. Susan Rice, the National Security Advisor, hasn't been on any of the Sunday shows since the famous Benghazi full Ginsburg she did, where she went on all the shows, and after the attack on the consulate in Benghazi on September 11th, 2008, before the, not 2008, 2012, excuse me, before the November 2012 election between Romney and Obama, which is why the whole thing got so politicized. And she's the one who went on all the Sunday morning shows, and that was before I did LiberalViewer Sunday live clip roundup, so I can't refer to my take on her going on all the shows, but she has finally come back, and she appeared on just one show this morning, Meet the Press. And before I get to, they actually talked about the whole Benghazi talking points from the last time she appeared. But before I get to that, I want to show you, since she's the National Security Advisor, she had the talking points this time she had are the Ukraine talking points. And so here's what the Obama administration has to say about the Ukraine this morning from National Security Advisor Susan Rice in this clip.
Well, David, Yanukovych's whereabouts, as you said, are not known at the present. What we do know is that he picked up in a very orderly fashion and left the capital, Kiev, just after having signed an agreement that was designed to lead to a unity government. From the U.S. point of view, our interests have been clear all along. We want to see a de-escalation of the violence. We want to see constitutional change. We want to see democratic elections in very short order. And the opportunity for the people of Ukraine to come together in a coalition unity government.
Is the United States on the side of the protesters?
The United States is on the side of the Ukrainian people.
I like that last one. That is like, it sounds exactly like what a talking point is supposed to sound like. You get the question, is the United States on the side of the protesters? And the answer in the talking points is the United States is on the side of the Ukrainian people. So, I mean, she did say a few things there, but it was mostly, you know, talking points, general policy statements, or general, not controversial policy statements that don't really give the specifics. But, you know, you're not going to get any specifics on the Ukraine at this point, especially when it's such a fast-moving situation. But I want to show those clips, and it was a big topic. I'd say the main topic on the shows. But there were several other topics that I want to get to. I want to show one quick clip on Syria, because there was a little coverage of that, not much in terms of the newsmakers, more in terms of the pundits talking about it. But Susan Rice, since she was on the NBC show Meet the Press with David Gregory, like I just showed there, she also took a question about Syria, and I want to show David Gregory asked the question, and first he like misstated the number of deaths in Syria by like a factor of 10, and then he made this equivalency. I don't know. I thought it was kind of a false equivalency to Rwanda that I thought Susan Rice did kind of a pretty good job of refuting, which I'll talk a little more about after I show you the clip here.
And you talk about the humanitarian assistance. The level of suffering is huge. The fact that Assad has killed, about 1 million people have died, the refugee crisis adding numbers to that by almost another 1 million. I mean, the scale of mass suffering is huge in
David,
Syria.
I think it's more like 100,000, which is
I misspoke.
horrific.
I'm sorry. Yeah, 100,000 killed. Excuse me, I was speaking about the refugee number. I apologize. But the scale of mass suffering is huge. Senator McCain has said that future presidents will apologize for what the U.S. has failed to do now. You've been asked in the past about mass suffering, genocide in Rwanda, and President Clinton's admitted failure to intervene. And you worked on those issues. And this is what you told The Atlantic back in September of 2001. I swore to myself that if I ever face such a crisis again, I would come down on the side of dramatic action, going down in flames if that was required. How does that view influence the advice you give to the president on Syria?
Well, first of all, David, this is not a genocide. It's a horrific civil war that has spilled over and infused the neighboring states. It's one that we have worked very hard to end through support to the opposition, through humanitarian assistance, through active and aggressive diplomacy. And David, we have every interest in trying to bring this conflict to a conclusion. But if the alternative here is to intervene with American boots on the ground, as some have argued, I think that the judgment the United States has made and the President of the United States has made is that is not in the United States' interest. We are very much committed to trying to work to resolve this conflict, but in a way that doesn't insert the United States back into a hot, bloody conflict in the middle of the Middle East.
No, I thought that was actually a pretty good answer, and I showed several other clips on LiberalViewer Sunday live clip roundup last Sunday that sort of juxtaposed John McCain, I think it was, talking about giving more military aid to the good rebels in Syria versus Katrina vanden Heuvel from The Nation talking about how putting more weapons in there is just going to be more hurt civilians. And it is the policy of the Obama administration at this point that it has to be a diplomatic solution, and they're not really looking to militarize it any more than it already is. I mean, I think they are giving some aid, but just not much in terms of aid. And anyway, I wanted to show that clip. And of course, now since Susan Rice has returned to the Sunday morning shows, David Gregory on Meet the Press did have to ask her about the whole Benghazi talking point episode. And I want to show you how she responded to that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that after I show you that clip here.
when you were last here, Ambassador Rice, it was an eventful morning on the story of Benghazi and the horrible attack on our compound there. We haven't seen you in a while. As you look back at your involvement in all of that, do you have any regrets?
David, no, because what I said to you that morning and what I did in every day since was to share the best information that we had at the time. The information I provided, which I explained to you, was what we had at the moment. It could change. I commented that this was based on what we knew on that morning, was provided to me and my colleagues, and indeed to Congress, by the intelligence community. And that's been well validated in many different ways since. And that information turned out in some respects not to be 100% correct. But the notion that somehow I or anybody else in the administration misled the American people is patently false. And I think that that's been amply demonstrated.
So I pretty much agree with that defense of what Susan Rice did on the Sunday morning shows. What was it, like 10 days, I think, after the September 11th, 2012 attacks on the consulate in Benghazi, Libya. And I think a lot of what she said turned out, or a significant amount of what she said turned out not to be true, but it had more to do with the fog of war and conflicting information than any kind of political spin. And the whole thing about blaming it on a video and calling it a terrorist attack, I mean, I think it's a tempest in a teapot, perhaps. But John McCain, who's been one of the biggest critics of the Obama administration on this point, he was over on Face the Nation after Susan Rice did her appearance on Meet the Press. And so Bob Schieffer was able to get his reaction to a clip of basically what I just showed you from Susan Rice. And so I want to show you John McCain's reaction to what I thought was a fairly reasonable explanation of what happened. Anyway, you can see it, and I'll talk about it a little more after I showed you here.
The notion that somehow I or anybody else in the administration misled the American people is patently false. And I think that that's been amply demonstrated.
So, do you have any reaction this time, Senator?
I'm almost speechless because it's patently obvious, first of all, that Susan Rice had no reason to be on the program. She had no involvement in it. Second of all, she read talking points that we are now beginning to believe came from the White House, which were absolutely false. We now know that the director, that the CIA station chief on the ground sent a message immediately saying not spontaneous demonstration. And of course, the information was totally misleading, totally false, and for Susan Rice to say such a thing, I think it's a little embarrassing, to tell you the truth.
Now, a lot of what John McCain said there wasn't accurate. I think he said more inaccurate things possibly than Susan Rice did when she went on those 5 Sunday morning shows, or I think it was 5 back on September 21st or around abouts there, 2012. And do you hear his laugh there at the beginning? That was kind of creepy, I thought. I don't know, maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just the only one who thought it was creepy. And of course, I'm not sure the questioning that Susan Rice got on Meet the Press about Benghazi was all that tough. You heard the first question there was, do you have any regrets? And then there was kind of a follow-up question about, do you think it lost you the Secretary of State job? And then also a question about lax security at the consulate and warnings about lax security. But it wasn't what she would have gotten on Fox News. And of course, Fox News was complaining about that. That's the last clip on Benghazi I want to show you. That Chris Wallace made sort of this gratuitous comment about Susan Rice's appearance on Meet the Press over in this clip.
We wanted to ask the Obama administration about the crisis in Ukraine, but they decided to put National Security Advisor Susan Rice on only one show today, in her first Sunday appearance since 2012, when she blamed the Benghazi terror attack on reaction to an anti-Islam video. Of course, Fox has led the way in questioning how the administration handled Benghazi. Perhaps Susan Rice didn't want to answer the tough questions we would have asked. What happens now in Ukraine, and what does it mean for relations between Barack Obama and Vladimir Putin? Our Sunday panel tackles...
Even there at the end, the Ukraine situation is all about Obama and Obama's reset. But I don't know. I think maybe they didn't send Susan Rice on to Fox News Sunday because of what Bill O'Reilly did with President Obama in his Super Bowl interview, where he went on and on about things that had been debunked many months ago. And I don't know. That whole thing, I think that was kind of embarrassing. I mean, I think Susan Rice should be able to go on Fox News Sunday, but I guess they were trying her out on Meet the Press first. Is that some sort of comment on Meet the Press? It did seem to me that David Gregory didn't ask her that many probing questions about Benghazi, but then again, I don't think Benghazi is all that worth the probing questions, but I don't think he asked her that many probing questions in general. But as I always say, you can go watch the whole thing by clicking on one of the links in the video description for all the shows that I take clips from, except for HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, where they don't put the whole thing. It's pay TV, so I guess you got to pay if you want to see it. The next topic I want to cover was the other big breaking news this morning that was covered basically on all the shows. The Mexican Marines captured the biggest drug lord in the world, basically, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, who El Chapo, that means Shorty, so they got Shorty, I guess. And there was one thing when I first saw it reported on This Week with George Stephanopoulos by Martha Raddatz. She said something that I actually thought it was funny when I first heard it, and then I'll discuss a little more after show it you here.
We're tracking breaking news this morning, the capture of the man some call Mexico's Osama bin Laden, one of the most wanted criminals in the world and the top illegal drug dealer in the U.S. Drug lord Joaquin Guzman, known as El Chapo or Shorty, became notorious for his global empire, his ruthless reputation, and his legendary ability to elude police.
Now, what I thought was a little bit amusing in that introduction was the Osama bin Laden of Mexico. I don't know, that just seemed a little bit over the top to me. Of course, I did hear, I watched the report afterwards from ABC's Pierre Thomas, and I don't know, maybe, I mean, they attributed 80,000 deaths to him, and so maybe I was a little quick to be amused there, and but they didn't directly attribute them. I wasn't sure exactly how closely connected the deaths were to the actual El Chapo, but anyway, I'll show you how they stated it over in this clip.
Guzman's criminal resume, infamous, thought to be responsible for 25% of drugs entering the U.S., controlling an astounding 80% of illegal drugs on the streets of Chicago. So rich, he made the Forbes magazine billionaires list. So vicious that nearly 80,000 people have died in drug-related violence in Mexico, and that's not including so many more from drug overdoses.
Sorry, yeah. So they said, so vicious, nearly 80,000 people have died in drug-related deaths in Mexico. And I'm not sure, does that mean that's the total number of people who've died in drug-related deaths in Mexico? And he's the top drug lord? Or I'm not sure, but whatever. I'm sure, I mean, I don't know if he's killed more people than Osama bin Laden, and I don't know if I should be amused at the comparison, but I did notice over on NBC's Meet the Press, they had their reporter, Mark Potter, who basically almost made the same statement over in this clip.
Good morning, David. To the Mexican government and U.S. drug agents, the arrest of Joaquin Guzman, known as El Chapo or Shorty, is equivalent to the killing of trafficker Pablo Escobar in Colombia, or even Osama bin Laden in the War on Terror. Chapo had been sought for years, and legends grew that he was invincible. But now, he's been caught. The arrest this weekend by Mexican Marines of Joaquin Chapo Guzman ends his years-long reign as the man widely believed to be the most powerful and prolific drug trafficker in the world. Authorities say he and the Sinaloa drug cartel, which he headed, were infamous for their levels of brutality throughout Mexico and along the U.S. border.
So yeah, you can see there that Meet the Press also called El Chapo the Osama bin Laden of Mexico, or at least they compared him to Osama bin Laden, so maybe it wasn't over the top. And then one of the weirdest facts about the whole thing came out. I don't normally show the pundits, because I don't want to be a pundit commenting on another pundit or commenting on the commentators. The whole meta commentary thing gets too like derivative or whatever. But I want to show Bob Schieffer on Face the Nation. The only place I saw this reported was in his commentary, and this is about the arrest of El Chapo over in this clip.
All over and done with here.
And you know, this is just like something out of a movie or something. And they catch him in bed. There's a woman here on one side, and there's an AK-47 on the other side. I hope he, you know, in the middle of the night, I guess he has to be careful to make sure which one he reaches for there.
Fortunately, he didn't.
I thought that was kind of amusing there. That has to be careful which one he reaches for. So I don't know. Am I finding too much amusement in the capture of this guy responsible for all this death and destruction? And I mean, even though I'm a person who happens to favor drug legalization, that doesn't mean I favor drug lords. In fact, one of the reasons I think that drug legalization is a good thing is because it will get rid of the money supply for drug lords, just like Prohibition created Al Capone. You have drug prohibition creating El Chapo or whatever, but not that I'm a big expert on El Chapo. I don't think I had, I think I have heard a couple references to El Chapo over the years, but nothing that would make me any sort of expert being able to comment on that. But I did want to show one other quick clip of Representative Mike McCaul, a Republican in Congress, was talking about this and about how he wants the United States to extradite El Chapo, even though he was captured by Mexican Marines. They used some DEA intelligence to do it, and there are also indictments against El Chapo in several U.S. cities. And, of course, Mexico's going to try him, not the U.S., but because he's escaped from prison. And anyway, I'll show you the reasoning from Republican Mike McCaul over on This Week with George Stephanopoulos. This is Martha Raddatz was in for George Stephanopoulos this week, talking to him in this clip.
I would. I think the normal sequence is Mexico, being a sovereign nation, has the first prosecution. However, there's a history here. He escaped from a prison in 2001. There is corruption in that country. And I would ask that the Mexicans consider extraditing him to the United States, where he will be put in a supermax prison under tight security where he cannot escape and be brought to justice with a life imprisonment sentence. I think that would be the best course for not only Mexico, but also the United States in ensuring that what happened in 2001 does not happen again.
And what?
Now, what I find really interesting about that particular clip is that they are asking for this drug lord to be brought into the United States because it's so safe, but that's the total opposite argument they use when it comes to Guantanamo. For some reason, the people in Guantanamo, the Osama bin Ladens of Osama bin Ladens, they can't be brought to the United States for trial and for being held in our safe, secure supermax prisons. But when it comes to El Chapo, all of a sudden, this is the place where we can really take care and be sure that he's not going to get away. So, I mean, those supermax prisons are pretty secure. I think they're secure for El Chapo or for, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed or whoever it is who's going to end up being convicted, or the people who we should actually try in our courts, like they're asking to try El Chapo, the people at Guantanamo. And anyway, that's why I want to show that last clip on the capture by Mexican Marines of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. But speaking of the drug war, I also want to show a quick clip about marijuana. Over on CNN State of the Union, Candy Crowley had 4 governors on, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. There was Mike Pence from Indiana, Republican. There was Dan Malloy from Connecticut, a Democrat. There was Jay Nixon from Missouri, where I lived for 5 years, and I actually fought Jay Nixon when I was a public defender, and he was Attorney General. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then the fourth, the last one, who was a Republican, well, I may have to show the clip and then tell you. Oh, was it? Well, here, let me show you the clip. Oh, I remember. It's from Texas. It's the guy who couldn't remember the third thing. It's Perry from Texas. So anyway, I want to show you this clip of Candy Crowley asking all four governors if any of them would consider a marijuana legalization, and how she got like 2 no's and no yeses, and then I'll talk about it a little more in this clip.
You picked up anything sort of watching other states. One of the big stories this year, of course, has been Colorado legalizing recreational use of small amounts of marijuana, as well as Washington State. When you look at it, big pot of money there with taxes. States can always use a little more money. Have any of you looked at it and thought, you know what, this is something I'd consider?
No.
No. 2 no's? Why not?
So yeah, she got 2 no's there and no yeses. The 2 no's from the Republicans and none of the Democrats trying to say yes there. And that the fourth one was Rick Perry, governor of Texas. I don't know why I kind of blanked on that. Maybe because I think of him as the guy who blanked. But I thought it was kind of telling when it comes to the politicians, at least the politicians who are thinking about their political futures. You can't get anyone to come out for marijuana legalization, despite a majority of the American people being pro-marijuana legalization, according to some recent polls in the 2 states, and people getting really optimistic that marijuana legalization is sweeping the nation or whatever. But I think that is kind of a warning that it hasn't reached the politicians who are trying to remain electable for, amongst all sorts of different kinds of voters. I think it's still too risky a position for anyone to say yes, and it's not very risky for 2 people to say no. So I want to show that. And also from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, one of the guests he had on, not on the panel, but as like for a one-on-one conversation at the beginning, was Michelle Alexander, who used to work for the ACLU. I think she was like director of the National Racial Justice Project or something like that. And she's written this book about the new Jim Crow and about mass incarceration, which is a huge problem in the United States, which incarcerates more per capita than any country in the world. And the drug war is a big part of that. And they talked about that. They gave some facts and figures that I kind of skipped over, but I wanted to give this clip that explains sort of the premise of the new Jim Crow, about how the drug war has created sort of the same set of discrimination on a lot of the same people that the old Jim Crow discrimination laws used to impose on them. And anyway, I'll show you that clip here.
So now we have a whole lot of people who we call criminals.
Absolutely.
So when you call someone a criminal, even if the crime is smoking pot or whatever, then you can do to them what we used to do to black people under Jim Crow.
Absolutely. Once you're labeled a felon, all the old forms of discrimination are suddenly legal again. Employment discrimination, housing discrimination, denial of the right to vote, exclusion from jury service. In many ways, people who are branded criminals and felons today are subject to second-class treatment, much like, their grandparents or great-grandparents may have been during the Jim Crow era. And
So yeah, I actually haven't read Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. That just like I still haven't read this book, The Loudest Voice in the Room, but it is like at the top of my reading list because I am a big believer in needing to fight mass incarceration and the Jim Crow consequences of criminal convictions in the United States is just one of the many problems. I mean, just putting people in prison for such a long period of time, whatever, there are a lot of problems, but I still think even life in prison is better than the death penalty, which was another issue that came up back on CNN's State of the Union, where Candy Crowley asked about the death penalty and how she was saying that there's some analysis that the death penalty is actually waning in the United States. And there she actually had one governor on who was against the death penalty, Dan Malloy from Connecticut, where there is no death penalty, but even he wouldn't come out like firmly against the death penalty, and I'll show that in a minute. But first I want to show Jay Nixon, the other Democrat. So, both Republicans were pro-death penalty, but the Democrats were split, and that's one of the problems with the death penalty is all Republicans, well, not all, but at least as in terms of the the party line, Republicans are pro-death penalty, and a lot of Democrats are pro-death penalty, including Jay Nixon, now the governor of Missouri. He used to be Attorney General when I was a public defender in Missouri, part of the state public defender system. And actually, when the summer I took the bar exam in Missouri between law school and getting a job, that's kind of a long story, but that summer after law school, while I was studying for the bar, I also worked for the capital litigation unit of the Missouri public defender system, which is basically the death penalty lawyers, and that was kind of eye-opening, and I was already against the death penalty before I started there, but after seeing that kind of sealed the deal for me, and there aren't a lot of good arguments in favor of the death penalty, and I want to show even a Democrat, Jay Nixon from Missouri, where I used to live, does not make a good pro-death penalty argument when he was asked about the death penalty by Candy Crowley on CNN State of the Union, and I will refute his argument that he made after I show it to you here.
Well, we're moving forward with that execution, and we'll continue to enforce the ultimate penalty. It's a serious business, and we treat it very seriously. Both in my time as Attorney General as well as now as Governor, I've been involved in those. I think it's really important, two things. Number one, that each of these cases is an individual. I mean, the death penalty is not a broad issue, and that's why you have juries involved and courts involved in individual decisions. And the second thing I ask everybody in the media is to remember the victims as these things move forward. I mean, I think there's just so much attention on both the process as well as the offender as you get near the end, and they try to make them stars. There are families out there that have had to suffer sometimes 10 or 15 years before that ultimate punishment is meted out. And I would just ask everybody to continue to think about
this murder took place.
Now, the bogus argument there that he made is about how the families of the victims are suffering and the death penalty is their, final resolution and what they're looking forward to. And, what he said about every case being different is true, but every victim is different and every victim's family is different. And I actually made a video a while back because of my work against the death penalty has put me in contact with the California crime victims against the death penalty, or I don't even have the name of I'm really bad at remembering names of, but I made this video. I think there'll be a link about it. The name of my video is "Fair to Ignore Murder Victims' Families Against the Death Penalty," and it was about this very issue and how coverage in my local newspaper, the Sacramento Bee, which is McClatchy owned, kind of made the same biased argument that somehow victims' families are always the ones who want the death penalty, and it's just not true. There are a lot of victims' families who don't want the death penalty. Either they think life in prison is a worse punishment, or they think that killing is wrong, or they have other moral qualms, or there are also people who I've talked about in that video, I think, who the killers of their loved ones were never caught, which is true for a huge number of murders. And because the death penalty is more expensive than life in prison, it drains resources. And yes, you did hear me say that correctly. The death penalty costs more to administer than keeping someone in prison for life. Just death penalty trials, there's a guilt phase and then there's a penalty phase, both of which cost $1 million. So that second $1 million already could pay for most sentences of life in prison in the general population, and there are all these other costs as well. And so yes, it is true, life in prison costs less than the death penalty. And so if you're a loved one who wants resources spent on catching people rather than executing them, and that is more important in terms of justice, I think, then you would be anti-death penalty. So there are a lot of really good arguments against the death penalty, and Governor Jay Nixon, who I've never really liked very much since I lived in Missouri, did not make a good argument in favor of the death penalty there. And then I want to show one more death penalty clip. This is Connecticut Governor Dan Malloy And I thought he made kind of a weak argument against the death penalty, even though it's not in his state. He wants to leave it up to the states, and he looks like he's hedging and, hemming, or, hedging and hawing, or whatever they say, because he's looking for his political future. He wants to be acceptable to all the people who like the death penalty, and even though his state doesn't have it. And I'll show you that clip here.
Well, listen, Connecticut decided that we didn't want to have the death penalty any longer. To go to your point, there are a number of states that have taken that step over the last few years. And so we're quickly approaching a majority of the United States citizens that will live in states that don't have the death penalty. It is a state's decision, and they get to make that decision. I can tell you that we have our lowest homicide rate, and we have our lowest crime rate in 46 years. We've substantially lowered homicides over the last few years as well. We're very proud of that fact, and in fact, I think we have a lower homicide rate than everybody at the table. Having said that, it is a state's decision. We made a decision. Our legislature decided, and I think most citizens of Connecticut are happy to move forward.
Do you?
Sounds more to me like Governor Dan Malloy there wants to move forward from the issue of the death penalty, because he doesn't want to be seen as against the death penalty because of his, every governor wants to run for president, they say, or I don't know, is that every senator, or maybe every senator and every governor? But on another show, in a clip I'm not going to show, I did see one of the pundits saying that there may be 7 Republican governors running for president in 2016, and a couple of them may have been on that panel there, though I guess I didn't really... Did I show any clips from... no, I didn't show any Rick Perry clips or Mike Pence clips, but... well, I did show them both saying no to legalizing marijuana, I guess, but having talked about the possible presidential race with those 7 Republican governors, one Democratic governor who some say might run for president is the Democratic governor of Maryland, and I want to show a clip from him. His name is Martin O'Malley, and I don't know, at first he was asked about whether he's running for president, and if you listen to his answer, it sounds more like maybe he's running to be Hillary Clinton's vice president, but I don't know. You tell me what you think after I show you the clip here.
Running for the Democratic nomination for president.
Well, I'm looking at that, but the most immediate responsibility I have is to govern Maryland well. And through difficult times, we've made our public schools the #1 in the country and have achieved the best level of job creation of any state in the Mid-Atlantic. And that's really what it's about. When every state succeeds, then America succeeds. And Democratic governors believe in doing the right things, the things that work, to strengthen our middle class so that we can grow our economy.
Okay, well, in that clip, maybe he sounds a little bit, maybe, did I say maybe enough times there, like he may be running for president, but he also could just be talking about his resume. But one of the things the vice presidential candidate has to do is be able to attack opponents. And I want to show you this one more clip from the governor of Maryland there, Martin O'Malley, talking about what's wrong with the Republican Party. And I think you can see the genesis of the vice presidential attack dog. I don't know, that he may be trying out for that role. And this is also from Face the Nation in this clip.
Well, I think the greatest disconnect is really between the ideologues that have taken over the once proud party of Abraham Lincoln and made it impossible for our Congress to do things that the vast majority of us Democrats and Republicans throughout the country agree make sense, like pay the country's bills, pass comprehensive immigration reform, do the common sense things. I mean, shutting our country down does not help job growth. Selling America short does not help us build a better future for our kids. And these are the things that the Tea Party Republicans have brought to our Congress and made it very difficult for Mr. Boehner and other Republicans even to enact the sort of reasonable compromises that all of us took for granted in years past.
But, you know, Governor, I'm sure you would concede that you have those on the left who would take the party as far that way as some of the Tea Party folks want to take the Republican Party on the right. I mean, when the president comes out and says he's not going to touch entitlement reform, that's like waving a red flag in front of a bull to the Republicans. I mean, have we given up on trying to get anything done and compromising on anything?
No, I think there are good things that we can still do. I mean, recently they were able to enact at least a budget deal for the next year. They were able to pass a farm bill. But the fact of the matter is that President Obama has reduced average annual spending increases to their smallest levels of any president since Dwight Eisenhower. The problem here is not that somehow seniors are getting too many benefits in terms of Social Security. The problem is our country's future is being choked by this ideological commitment to greater tax cuts for the very wealthiest of Americans. And that's hurting our country. It's hurting our ability to make progress. It's hurting middle-class wages. That's why so many Democratic governors are pushing for an increase in the minimum wage. And yet you see many Republican ideologues saying, oh, we can't do that. Somehow, if a person's actually able to lift their family through their hard work out of poverty with a better minimum wage, that somehow is an affront to their trickle-down ideology. And the fact is prosperity has grown from the middle out and the middle up.
So what do you think? Is that somebody trying out to be vice president with the attacks on the Republicans? And he's got that good talking point I think is going to be big in 2016 and maybe even 2014 about income inequality and giving all these benefits to the rich and how we need actually to give benefits to the middle class and instead of trickling down, build from the middle out. Well, I don't know. I just saw this Robert Reich, former labor secretary, video DVD movie, Inequality for All, and I think there's a website, inequalityforall.com or something like that, where you can buy it or check it out or see clips and some of the information in it. And building from the middle out is also one of his big arguments. So I think that may be a big talking point for the Democrats and a big way to attack the Republicans. And also, speaking of tax cuts for the rich, over on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, they had former President George W. Bush on, who is responsible for some of the big tax cuts to the rich we're suffering from still. Well, not quite as bad, but I guess the only remaining, well, some of the tax cuts are still there and some have been repealed over time. But one of the things I thought was kind of amusing is they were talking about his, this seemed like a joke almost to me, the George W. Bush Institute. That's what they were talking about. I guess he has an institute. I mean, I've heard of presidential libraries, but anyway, does that sound like the punchline to a joke to you? Maybe it's just me, but he was actually on talking about this study that the George W. Bush Institute is doing to try to find out more about the problems of veterans coming back from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And he also is doing a lot to try to help veterans transition, which, you know, I can't fault him for that work. I don't see any problem with helping veterans. And the interview by Martha Raddatz was pretty much focused on that. There weren't a lot of really probing questions. In some ways, I would say it was I wouldn't say a fawning interview, but it was definitely a soft interview. And the closest she came to talking to him about his failures and about how his work with the veterans, is it like out of guilt over what he did in invading Iraq and over, you know, weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist and all that. I'll show you the clip that came closest to exploring that whole thing from This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Martha Raddatz substituting in on ABC this morning in this clip.
For President Bush, knowing the great cost of these wars, 6,800 American service members killed and 51,000 wounded, this new initiative to help returning veterans helps him as well.
I think all of us, and I'll include myself in that, feel deeply about veterans. But for you, Mr. President, it has to help you cope with what happened in those wars.
No question it helps. I mean, I have a duty. You know,
obviously get slightly emotional talking about our vets because I have an emotional, I'm in there with them. But I'm also, my spirit is always uplifted when I visit with vets. I say there's no self-pity. We've got a society that's incredibly comfortable, and too many people saying, oh man, woe is me, not our veteran community. They don't say woe is me. They say, what can I do to continue to serve?
Oh.
So yeah, there seemed to be sort of a oblique criticism of former President George W. Bush and his Iraq policy, and the question there from Martha Raddatz, and of course she played some like clips there that made it seem a little more critical than I think the question she actually asked in the room there. But you saw from the answer there, it seemed to me like he got emotional about it, and at first I thought maybe he had some guilt, but he seemed sort of like oblivious to the whole guilt part. It was more, emotion out of his empathy for those that his brothers, and I'm sure that a lot of the veterans he works with actually feel that way. He is their former commander-in-chief, and I'm sure there are a lot of Republican veterans who still support George W. Bush, even though I know that there are a lot of people in groups like Veterans for Peace that don't support, even people I know personally. So there are veterans of those wars who are not big fans of George W. Bush. But anyway, I thought that was kind of a revealing clip to show with his getting emotional, but not really for the right reasons. And that seems, like I said, I think you can see the whole interview down in a link in the video description to This Week with George Stephanopoulos. And you can look for yourself and decide whether you think it is critical or fawning, or I thought it was more on the side of fawning than critical anyway. So before I finish up here and get to some of the live comments, I see I have more than 100 viewers, I think. So I'm always glad to see so many people joining me for the live show. I want to show a couple more clips from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, and a couple topics that are, political news topics, but not really like the breaking stories of this week so much, but they're topics that sort of recur. And one has to do with separation of church and state. Bill Maher asked a question of his panel about the drought in these religions. I think he was talking about the Catholic Church having people pray for rain because of the drought. I actually made a video a while back. I don't have a screen capture or anything to put up or a link, but about how Fox News covered rain in Texas as the answer to prayers for rain. And I know actually here locally where I am in Sacramento, the local CARE, the Muslim group CARE, Sacramento Valley, was working with some other groups to pray for rain. And I mean, personally, I don't believe in praying for rain, and Bill Maher asked about that, and I thought there was an interesting answer from comedian Steve Coogan, who is also in the Academy Award nominated movie Philomena, and they were talking about religion and the Catholic Church because that's the topic of that movie. And here's Bill Maher asking about praying for rain in this clip.
We're having a terrible drought out here. It's from the, this is directly from Associated Press. It says the California Conference of Catholic Bishops on Tuesday, this is about a month ago, called on people of all faiths to join in prayers for rain. And I just wonder if that would ever happen in England or anywhere in Europe. Would they pray for rain?
No, they wouldn't. You know what's so strange? This is the difference between, what always puzzles me is that in the US, you have the church and state are separated. In the UK, the church and state, well, officially. In the UK, the church and state are supposed to be intertwined. Yet if a politician invokes God in a political speech in the UK, he's going to lose votes. In this country, he'll gain votes.
Isn't that something?
So yeah, I thought that was kind of an interesting comment from Steve Coogan there, and it's one of the things about separation of church and state in the United States. We actually, with our separation of church and state, we have higher church attendance in the United States than they have in the UK, where there is a state religion and it isn't like the Queen, the titular head of the church, and you got like the Archbishop of Canterbury. I seem to remember it. I remember several months ago I made some comment about France still having Catholicism as their state religion, which is not true since like the Third French Republic. It's because my knowledge of European history generally stops right around World War II, or I don't know, because I studied history from like the unification of Germany in the 1870s to World War II. That was like my like sweet spot. And so things that happened after about 1945. Anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent, but the point I was trying to make is that we have separation of church and state in the United States, and much higher church attendance than in the UK, where they have a state church. And I think one of the reasons is that, you know, we think that separation of church and state is supposed to protect the government from intrusion by religion, but what it also does is it helps religion from being smeared by cynicism and corruption and all the other negative things that people associate with the government. You know, sometimes people like the government and sometimes people distrust it. It goes up and down, the level of distrust, but you know, people distrust the government and dislike the government for a lot of reasons, and if you make religion just part of that sort of like bureaucracy and hypocrisy and all the other things people associate with government, it makes it a lot more appealing, a lot less appealing to people. And I mean, religion doesn't have appeal to a lot of people anyway, but I think it has more appeal when it is separated from government than when it's melded with government like it is in the UK. And anyway, that's why I wanted to show that clip from Real Time with Bill Maher and Steve Coogan making that observation about how religion is much more acceptable in our politics where we're here in the United States, where we have separation of church and state. And I think it's because religion and the moral authority of religion has not been as undermined here in the United States, because we have separation of church and state, and government tends to undermine moral authority. You know, if religion is like the DMV, it's not very godly, I guess. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling at this point, but I want to show one more clip before I get to the live comments in the discussion section. And this is for those people who think that I am too positive in my comments about Bill Maher, and I am a fan of Bill Maher as a political comedian. I watched Bill Maher back in his ABC show, Politically Incorrect. I actually saw a taping live before that show was canceled after September 11th. I've seen Bill Maher do his stand-up routine live even before Politically Incorrect, like years ago, because I'm kind of a fan of stand-up comedy. So I am a fan of him as a political comedian, but that doesn't mean that I agree with all of his ideas. And actually, I've noticed my YouTube videos, my edited, produced ones about Bill Maher, in most of them I end up criticizing something he said. And he says a lot of things I don't agree with, especially even though he's supposedly rational in his fight against religion. There's some things he says about science and nutrition and vaccines, and his science knowledge seems to be a little bit lacking. And I want to show one comment he made in his new rules, and it had to do with nutrition, and I don't necessarily disagree with his nutrition point, but he did show a little lack of knowledge about science that I'll talk about after I show the clip here.
New rule now that Doritos is introducing Doritos Loaded, the new Doritos chips stuffed with processed cheese. Americans have to... Oh, fuck it, eat it. Eat the whole bag. I don't care anymore. Let's see if we as a nation get ourselves so unhealthy we have to invent something called hepatitis E.
Now, I was watching HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher there with my wife, who is a physician, who immediately pointed out to me, as you can see from the WHO fact sheet that I put a link to down in the video description, there actually is something called hepatitis E already. It's not very prevalent in the United States, but there are actually 57,000 hepatitis E related deaths. It's mostly in East and South Asia, and it's a problem in China, and it comes from fecal oral route is the primary means of transmission. So in contaminated water and places where they're contaminated water. So anyway, I mean, I guess that's just a little mistake. Although you would think someone would check that on the show about whether there actually is a hepatitis E before they broadcast that nationwide on HBO, but I guess maybe it's that nitpicking. I don't know. Sometimes people think my videos are nitpicking, so maybe that clip is nitpicking. I will start looking down in the live comments here because that was my last clip. I'm already over an hour, so I want to kind of finish up here because it's been kind of a long week and a long weekend, and I do want to scroll down here and try to start maybe at the beginning when I first started broadcasting the show. Before I started, people are talking about Walking Dead and why am I broadcasting during Walking Dead? Can I broadcast earlier? Well, you know, this is about as quickly as I can watch all the shows. I make my notes, and then I go and I capture the clips and I process the clips and I decide what order to put them in, and I import them into my broadcasting software and get all the sound levels right. Hopefully they're all right. And anyway, so no, the answer is no. I cannot do it any sooner than 6:30 p.m. Pacific time, and I'm often rushing at the last minute to get it done. So that wasn't quite an on-topic thing. Let's see. Oh, I see NO8549 gave me a typo correction in my description, which I fixed, which worked. They're talking about, I see, but Benghazi. Oh, Pat's Rules 213 says exactly, Syria is Syria's business. Well, I think it does have to come from the people of Syria. They have to be the primary authors of the solution in Syria, but I don't know, we can give some aid to affect the facts on the ground, to give better bargaining power to the good people in Syria, I guess, but I do agree we shouldn't really militarize the situation further, because there's so many civilians getting hurt, and that's the other thing we can do is humanitarian assistance, especially in Jordan. I guess there are like 1 million refugees at this point, which is what David Gregory misstated as 1 million people killed, but it is like a regional problem, and it's also part of this whole Sunni Shia thing with the anyway, it's there are things. Let's see. Oh, Dragon Ivan said 80,000. This must be on the El Chapo story. 80,000 is likely the number killed in drug-related incidents in Mexico. Though blaming him for all those isn't exactly true, but he certainly called in enforcers to keep his reign strong. Yeah, I didn't have time to research that, unfortunately. I did the best I could, like I was saying before, but yeah, the phrasing of that seemed kind of weird. So I'm going to see if I can... Oh, I see Rick Perry. Oh, it says, amazed... Satsuma says, lol, LV was having selective memory issue on remembering Perry. Yeah, I kind of like noticed that myself. I noticed in one of the clips I didn't show in an intro about Rick Perry on State of the Union, they talked about him and they showed him saying that there were a few problems that America was facing, and they showed him saying 2 of them, and the one thing I thought of when I first saw that was, and the third one I forget, and I don't know if that was some sort of like real subtle reference to his like unable to remember the 3 things. Maybe that's what set off my problem. Let's see. Pat's Rules 213 says we should be against the death penalty. Liberal viewers right. It's cheaper to keep them in prison for life than kill them. Yeah, well, that's definitely true. Let's see. Oh, but then I see some comments here from Hans Blitz saying it only costs more because of the red tape. 1 20-cent bullet theoretically is all that they need. Well, it's not about the means of execution. I've heard that 20-cent bullet, and I already explained that, first of all, the Constitution requires a penalty phase trial after the guilt phase trial, and that's an extra $1 million. And if you put someone in the general population here in California, it costs I've seen a lot of different estimates, but say $30,000 a year. So if you're in the general population at $30,000 a year, that means 3 years is what, $90,000. So 30 years, you still haven't gotten to the $1 million it costs just for the extra penalty phase trial if you live 30 years, which a lot of people don't. Most people who get the death penalty die, at least in California's death row, and it costs a lot more to keep them in the death row cells because they're one person in each cell and there's extra security. It's like or I think it's around $100,000 a year to keep people in a death penalty death row cell compared to, I was saying, like $30,000 a year in the general population, even if you have life in prison. So, and then if you actually want to speed up the process, there's another study that shows you have to spend more money to either get people better lawyers at their original trials or to spend more for appellate lawyers because there's so many mistakes. That is, unless you want to start executing people who didn't do it, which we probably already have. And anyway, don't get me started on the death penalty. I guess you already did get me started on the death penalty. And I'm actually way over time here, and there are several other topics I wanted to look in the discussion section because I really appreciate that so many people joined me for the live show today. What it seems like we're up to, 115, 120 at some point. But I'm going to finish up the show now. I did want to say, I've been saying for weeks I'm working on this video about the whole Woody Allen controversy, and I promised I'd finish it this month before the Oscars because I think there's going to be a little more rehashing around the time of the Oscars, which is next Sunday. So hopefully this week I will be making a video about this MSNBC story that I thought was totally biased on the whole Woody Allen molestation allegations from the 1990s. I may also make a video about immigration issues here in California because that's what's kept me kind of busy, or one of the things that's kept me kind of busy working here with my local sheriff and implementing the Trust Act, and that's kind of a complicated issue. And anyway, I appreciate all of you who joined me. I do this every Sunday, taking the best clips. I hope you enjoyed the clips. I picked out the best clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows and the political comedy clips I can find that kind of fit in on the topics. I think next week we'll have Saturday Night Live again. No more Seth Meyers, but we'll see what we come up with on Weekend Update, if there's anything worth including. And so I'll be doing this again like every Sunday, 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. Please join me. And for my viewers here in the United States, enjoy the rest of your Sunday, the end of your weekend. My viewers around the world, beginning of your week, wherever you are. I hope I left you with the end of your weekend or the beginning of your week a little bit more informed about the issues that the corporate media think are important here in the United States. So I guess I'll see you all around the internet.